get started in just a moment. Welcome and thank you for joining us today for the Bridge Lunch Break event. My name is Jackie Garrett, Fund Development Associate at Bridge Michigan, your source for nonprofit, nonpartisan news in Michigan. In this event, we'll take your questions about student mental health and academic recovery, college and workforce readiness, and the educator workforce. Basically everything to do with Michigan's education in 2024. Our special guest panelists will include Jack Elsey at the Michigan Educator Workforce Initiative, Dr. Elena Zachary Ross at Ypsilanti Community Schools, Karen Nowak at Gretchen's House, and Melanie Dupre-Lurst at Westwood Community Schools. Education reporter Isabel Lohman will moderate this discussion. Our conversation will begin in just a moment, and Isabel will start the discussion with questions for our panelists, and then we'll turn to your questions that you submitted during this event or before during registration. Please type any questions you have for our panelists into the chat window at any time. If you're not a panelist, please remain muted throughout today's discussion. We are recording today's conversation and it will be posted on Bridge Michigan this week. You can subscribe to our newsletters by visiting www.bridgemi.com and click subscribe. Events like this one are made possible by the support of our Bridge members, and if you'd like to join this membership community, we will drop a link to do so in the chat. Another reminder, please do stay muted throughout today's conversation. I will now pass it over to Isabel to get us started.
Hey everyone, thank you so much for being here. I'm Isabel Lohman. I'm the education reporter at Bridge Michigan. I cover everything from pre-K to higher ed to K-12. You all submitted a record number of questions, so I want to make sure we can get to as many of them as possible. We have everything from questions about pre-K programming to the mental health of students. We had a lot of comments and questions about standardized test scores. We had questions about the teacher workforce. We also had some questions about college and career readiness. So we have different themes that we're going to go throughout. But if you have a question that doesn't get answered or you have a different burning question, please feel free to put it in the chat and we will get to those later in the discussion. I want to start big picture here because the title of this program has to do with challenges and opportunities. So I'd like to go around the room and just ask Melanie, Elena, Karen, and Jack, what is one challenge that is facing Michigan's education sphere right now? Let's start with you, Melanie.
I would say one of the biggest challenges is teacher shortages, making sure that we have adequate, high quality teachers for our workforce and really take a focus on that to make sure that all of our students are receiving education from high quality educators.
Jack?
Well, Melanie clearly took the page out of our playbook here. I would agree. And I think it's just to add to it, I think the educator shortage is real, not just because we can't find enough teachers sometimes, but also because it's important that we eliminate the barriers into the profession for so many people who want to become teachers, and that we're finding new and innovative ways to design schools and staff schools to retain teachers long-term as well. So it's a multifaceted problem, but I agree with Melanie.
Elena?
Well, since Melanie hit the nail on the head, I'll just add, it takes full services to educate our students. So it's also the ancillary staff. So when we say educators, we're also talking about school psychologists, school social workers, OT, occupational therapists, speech and language providers. And so those people are so hard to find, and yet they're the people who are needed the most next to our classroom teachers. And we need them in every district, no matter if it's rural, suburban, or urban. So those teachers, those services are just, those are the pins and the anchors and the glue that keep our students together.
Thank you for that. And Karen?
So I agree with everyone that spoke before. I think that the equitable education is important, and I think that we are getting there with the universal preschool that is starting to take shape in our state, but also having those support pieces that I think it was Melanie talked about it, possibly having our speech therapists and our mental health providers and counselors, everything that we need to make sure make sure children have that strong foundation. Because without that, right, academics are important, but you need that strong foundation first, so.
Thanks for that. And I know we started on sort of a downer in the sense of like, what's a big challenge, but we're gonna, throughout this conversation, talk about opportunities to change the picture. Jack, let's talk a little bit about that. We've heard over and over again in this panel that teacher shortage is a concern, but not just teachers, also school psychologists and mental health workers. Where's the state at with that, and what can be done to further this message?
Well, I'll say Michigan, in terms of getting on offense around this problem, has taken some really important steps in recent years. Our legislature, compared to most states across the country, has invested a lot in the teacher workforce. And, you know, a few bright spots that I would mention, one of which, admittedly, we were a part of, Talent Together, which allowed no-cost bachelor's degrees in teacher certification for folks who wanted to become teachers around the state. And in 2 years, we've received 4,100 applications. And I think if you'd had told us that a few years ago, there were, you know, nearly 5,000 people around the state who wanted to be teachers, I think a lot of us would have been skeptical about that number. But what we've learned is that we don't necessarily have a shortage of people who want to become teachers. We just have a lot of people for whom that profession was not accessible. And I'll give you a case in point. I spoke to one of our participants the other day who said, I've been a paraeducator for 20 years. And the idea of quitting my job and going back to college, let alone paying for college, to finish my bachelor's degree and then get my certification felt absolutely impossible. I couldn't do it for me. I couldn't do it with a family until, you know, a program like Talent Together comes along that says, we're going to allow you to take coursework online. We're going to cover your college costs, and we're going to give you a registered apprenticeship under a mentor teacher for a full year to learn what it looks like, feels like, sounds like to be a teacher in a classroom. And, you know, our retention rates after the first year are really high. We're at 94% after the first year, which is an enormous retention rate within the talent market. So that's made possible by the investments. It's also made possible by district superintendents working together. Many of the intermediate school district superintendents dedicated hundreds of hours of their time, including Dr. Zachary Ross here, also dedicated lots of hours of her time to creating a program that was going to work not just for teacher candidates, but for schools. So there are some bright spots in Michigan. In fact, I would argue we're one of the leading states when it comes to both investing and designing innovative programs around the problem.
And can you talk to us a little, we just had a reader question that was talking about the high teacher to student ratio, and then along with that, the fact that districts are still saying that there's a teacher shortage. Can you explain some of the numbers behind this?
Yeah, so there's a lot of misinformation that gets put out there because people on both sides of the aisle have access to grind on this problem, and I think beyond any case I would make, I would say go talk to Dr. Zachary Ross and ask her, you know, what her hiring picture is like at Ypsilanti Public Schools every year. She's the expert we ought to be relying on. But suffice it to say, there's a lot of data out there that tracks like the number of adults working in a district versus the number of kids, and not every adult in a district is a teacher. And so a lot of the data that gets put out there around sort of the reduction of adult to student ratios, that doesn't necessarily mean we have smaller class sizes and more teachers available to us for all the license areas and classes that need to be taught. So we should be careful about the data, but suffice it to say, Michigan as a city as a state has far fewer people going to ed schools, close to a 2/3 drop over the last decade and a half. Far fewer people staying in the profession. We lose teachers at a higher rate than the national average. And what that means is that for lots of districts around the state, although it's uneven, for lots of districts around the state, when they have a, say, high school math vacancy, they might get one resume, maybe two, when they post that job. Whereas 20 years ago, they might get 20 resumes. And from a hiring perspective, that feels very different to somebody like Dr. Zachary Ross, right, who wants to make sure that her students have the best educators in front of them every single day.
Thanks for that. You know, at the same time, Karen, you mentioned that the state is expanding pre-K access. So the state's pre-K system right now is it's a bunch of different parts together. You've got local classrooms that are run by intermediate school districts and local school districts. You also have community-based programs like Gretchen's House, which is where you work. These can be YMCAs, they can be private owners, they can be nonprofits, that sort of thing. And so there's a lot of different parts that make up the pre-K system as currently designed. How does the state, or what does the state need to do to incentivize more people to become teachers so that free pre-K for all can actually become a reality?
I wish I knew the answer to that. So I think what we're looking at is the fact that the teachers in those programs at a public school make more money than teachers in those programs, your community-based programs. So there's that. How do we make that? How do we make the community-based programs look attractive to teachers going into the field, right? If they can go to a public school and make more money. But even that being said, those teachers make less money than your K-5 teachers with the same degrees often. So there's that challenge. Also the challenge of the public schools can offer summers off where your community-based programs don't. So there are going to be a lot of challenges with that, a lot of things to work out. But I would say in terms of keeping teachers once you have them in those programs, a lot of it comes down to having administrative support and administration that understands early childhood and also understands that the social learning is really important as the basis for everything else that's to come. So.
Thank you for that. I'm curious, Melanie and Elena, you all educate students that come from the pre-K world. Some of your kids probably do attend a preschool environment. Some probably stay home until they're at kindergarten. I'm curious, what do you see as sort of what is needed in the K-12 space to help ensure that pre-K is successful, if anything?
I'll start. I think in regards to the pre-K space, we need to first look at kindergarten isn't even mandatory in the state of Michigan. So we experience a lot of kindergartners who don't start all different times of the year or don't start at all and show up at first grade. And so we're launching a pre-K initiative, which is important because we know the skills and the things that our students need to become successful and have those early literacy skills. And that starts in kindergarten right now, in offering the pre-K opportunities to be taken advantage of will only benefit once the students reach kindergarten and first grade and help with those early literacy skills. But until we address the whole, which is making kindergarten mandatory, I think that we might have some gaps still of kids who now attend pre-K, and then we don't have students who still start attending until they reach first grade or mid-year kindergarten, if at all. So I think that that is one hoop that we need, or, a gap we need to close in order for our pre-K programming that they're launching to even be more successful.
Elena?
Yes, I'm just really excited about possibilities as we keep hearing about, we started at Ypsilanti. I'm just very fortunate that the high school program started there. Perry, the Perry Project, why we have Head Start in the United States is because of Ypsilanti schools. And we have early Head Start. We started the year-long program right now at Ypsilanti Community Schools for the 2024-25 school year. And I'm with Karen. Our early Head Start and our Head Start and GSRP programs are not paid the same as our K-12 teachers. And so we're advocating for that, even at Ypsilanti Community Schools. And I also know that our governor is looking at PK programs and thinking about how that funding can be expanded. And so I think it's up to all of us to say that we have to have a birth through 26 year program, and we have to fund it equitably. And when we talk about that, it's about all of us that are listening now, not just educators, not just spaces that we're paid and we're advocates, but all of us. And I know that parents are the first teachers. And so there are parents, unfortunately, who have children who are 0 through 3, who receive services. They're advocating. Parents who need, who see that there's no child care services in certain areas, who say, where can I get help? And who want quality. And we all need that quality for us to change what's happening in our K-12 systems. And so we must advocate that every single child who's eligible can get early services. We need to have every single child who's eligible to have early Head Start and Head Start services, not based off of income, because that's who gets it right now, but everybody should have it so that we can have and be able to compete globally in this society.
Thank you for that, Elena. And if you all have questions about Head Start or Early Head Start, we have some reporting on that on our website. So let us know. There's some really good stuff going on in the chat right now. There's a conversation about how to retain community college school counselors. And then there's also a little bit of a conversation about what else needs to be happening on the pre-K space. So please feel free to continue to put your questions in there. We had a lot of questions from readers on 2 different topics: MSTEP, which are standardized test scores, and chronic absenteeism. In the state right now, nearly 30% of kids last year in the K-12 system missed 10% or more of school days. When you look at the MSTEP scores, the 3rd and 4th graders who took the test last spring are testing below students who took this test pre-pandemic. When I talked to people over the last few weeks, no one is really surprised that those MSTEP scores are where they are, but they are saying more needs to be done. So Karen, I want to start with you. First of all, a reader asked, do preschool centers teach students any early literacy skills?
I know ours does. We participate with a curriculum, HighScope, which Elena mentioned, and that focuses on active learning. But literacy is a part of what we do throughout every child's day in all areas of the room. And teachers are trained specifically to scaffold children's learning and to ask the right questions and lead children in those directions, all while children are exploring and, finding their way in what they're interested in. But there are ways to do it, which are developmentally appropriate for preschoolers. So yeah, literacy is a part of everything that we do. So.
And then moving on to the next part of the curriculum and their continuum, Melanie and Elena, we had some readers. I'm going to read a couple comments that way, and then we can have a discussion about it. So one reader asked about effective strategies to help students catch up. They asked, how much would it cost to implement the successful strategies at scale needed for every student who's 1 or more school years behind to actually meet grade level expectations? They also asked about if society should put more priority on high schoolers who are about to graduate versus younger students who could use those interventions right away. We also had someone who wanted to know if MSTEP is even testing the right ideas or the right skill sets for students. And we had a lot of questions about that. So I want to give Melanie and Elena just a chance to sound off on MSTEP. Elena, we'll start with you.
Well, first of all, they've done a lot of exploring through the School Research Finance Collaborative, SRFC, a long time ago, that already told us how much it costs. It does cost a lot more than we're spending to ensure that our students are getting what they need. And I'm excited again that they've continued to add money. We're hearing that tomorrow we're going to receive some additional funding, because we understand after the pandemic, our students, because of the mental health needs, we're seeing the scores. The scores are not a surprise to us. The scores have been flattening, and because of some of the mental health needs. But going to your question, we shouldn't be focused so much on the MSTEP scores. We're seeing growth through a lot of our school districts are using NWEA MAP testing to see growth. are our students growing, and where do they have the needs? And so I'm excited that many of us are using some of the AI adopted, and people are saying, well, oh my goodness, I'm afraid of AI things, but the NWEA MAP test, they help to assist teachers. We're asking, how can we give some teachers relief? That was the first question we talked about. We need to give teachers some assistance and not put too much stress on them. And the test adapts to meet the students where they are and to assist the teachers in the classrooms. And so it targets them, and we're hearing that they still need high dosage tutoring. They still need time on task right where they are to give them that. So it's not every student, but the students who have that need. We still need in the summers to have students in school. We know attendance is an issue. And so we've got to have more time in school. So we have time during the school day for tutoring. We need time before school, time after school. If they're after school and not in sports and not in things that are productive, we need them after school in tutoring. And then high dosage tutoring, not just doing homework, but high dosage tutoring, and then in the summers.
Thank you, Elena. And if you all have questions about tutoring or academic recovery, please feel free to put them in the chat. Melanie, what are your thoughts? Is MSTEP testing the correct skills for students? And what can schools be doing to be making up that learning loss?
I think MSTEP takes a snippet of what we need to know about students, problem solving, numeracy, literacy, but it doesn't go into the more advanced skills that students really need when they graduate from high school. Communication, collaboration, creativity, hands-on things. We have students doing phenomenal things through the MAVEN program, which is STEM-based. They're exploring, they're explaining their learning, they're demonstrating their learning. So there's so many more ways where our students could demonstrate what they know other than a 1 point in time test such as the MSTEP. So I really think that it needs to be reevaluated to measure a wealth of skills, and not just by a single day test, but perhaps by a portfolio or some other tasks where they could show their learning, because our students are demonstrating learning in a lot of different ways and they are showing growth. And I agree with Elena. We also administer NWEA to our students K-8, and we are seeing growth and we are seeing improvement, and we're not surprised that we're not where we were pre-pandemic, because chronic absenteeism has also tremendously increased since the pandemic. There's still fear about COVID, that, COVID still exists, and parents are more hesitant to send kids to school. When they used to send them to school when they had a little sniffle, now they're keeping them home. And there's a variety of reasons why students are staying home, but that if they're not in school to learn, then that in turn affects what we see at the end. And so I agree, we are doing high dosage tutoring during the day, before school, after school, summer school. So yes, if they're not involved in athletics or some other activity, we need them participating. And when you talked about the focus of elementary or secondary, we've been pushing in our curriculum directors meeting for more things regarding secondary literacy. Yes, it has a big impact at the elementary school, but we can't leave the high schoolers behind. We can't graduate them with low achieving reading levels. We need them to be successful. So what things can we get? We need more investment in the secondary as well as elementary, so that we can help those students bridge those gaps and be more prepared for their post-secondary options that come to them.
Thank you for that. We also had a question in the chat about the WorkKeys test, which I believe is in the 8th grade. I can't remember off the top of my head if that's correct. But do you all have any insights on the WorkKeys test and if it's testing the skills that you all just talked about?
Yeah, I'm happy to speak to that. I mean, I put the reply in the chat, but I think a lot of proponents of the 6 C's in general, which is what Melanie was speaking about, would argue that sort of paper and pencil and or online assessments as they exist now, whether it's WorkKeys or MSTEP, sort of missed the mark when it comes to the deeper skills, assessing the deeper skills that we would want all of our students and frankly our citizens to possess going forward. I think the challenge is you won't find, I think, a whole lot of disagreement among certainly educators that that's the case. And yet, even among those who value the standardized assessments and what they tell us now, they're just incomplete. I think the challenge is finding a way to assess these sort of 21st century skills, if you will, in a way that you can measure at scale. It's really hard to assess a collaborative skill, for instance, for every student in the state of Michigan on some sort of standardized test, right? And I think that's, maybe AI is the future of helping us figure that out.
Jack, AI is a big thing. It can't, it could be really good. It could be really bad. It could be somewhere in the middle. Thank you for that. We have some additional questions in the chat related to this topic. I want to get back to this, but can we talk about chronic absenteeism for a second? So like I mentioned, roughly 1/3 of Michigan K through 12 students are missing 10% or more of school a day, or school in a year. I don't think it's any surprise that if you're not in your seat during classroom time, it's going to be harder for you to learn. It's going to be harder for you to do well on a test. Melanie or Elena, are your districts doing anything unique to try to ensure that students are showing up to school every single day?
I'll go. We have a partnership with Concentric. And what we do is through our SEL team, our social workers, our student support specialists, we review the students who are trending in chronic absenteeism. And we have a representative go out on behalf of the school district and do home visits to find out what the barriers are for the parents and why those students aren't attending or what's preventing them from attending. And then reconnect them back with the school to see what we can do to help them remove those barriers. A lot of times that has bridged that gap, and we're able to help provide resources or guide them to resources that they need so that their students can be back in school. But that's one method that we use to address chronic absenteeism.
Surprisingly enough, we also have a relationship with Concentric. And one of the things we do, we have 3 parent liaisons, and we've taken away that stigma of calling it a truancy officer. And we're being proactive. That's the part about it, is we have a number. We try to not wait till they get to a certain number of days off. We look at it and we think about these people as people who everyone in the community knows that has a relationship. We also have trusted parent advisors. You know, those parents that everybody talks to. So those are the people who tell us, hey, you know what? She's been out. You better call on that girl. You better check on her. Those are the ones we can call on. They can call the mother and say, hey, what's going on? We call those people from Concentric. They go knock on the door. They use an app. They send that app and say either the person has moved. They say, they had a bad conversation at your school. They're really upset about how they talk to us, or they're really having a hard time. They don't have a coat and they don't want to tell someone, or they're kind of embarrassed. Can we send the coat or send someone or send that there today, and here are the sizes? And so they really build that real nice relationship. And they do it in such a discreet way, and are able to do it right there just in time at using the app. And so it's been a wonderful relationship builder and helps fulfill that gap that our social workers, remember we said that we don't have enough social workers and counselors and all those other people. They're just an extension to the staff that we have at our schools.
Thank you. I'm curious if you all are tracking additional metrics. So for example, you work with Concentric. Concentric is building this trust with the parents. Elena, you talked about how you want to avoid the stigma of a truancy officer. Are you finding more success with this sort of partner to parent relationship versus a truancy law enforcement action?
Yes, that's the wonderful thing. They give us additional data. We have been just trying to use PowerSchool, our student information system, to just give us just numbers of absence absences, but now we have additional data to tell us exactly what's happening. And so it's really giving us clear information on, is this COVID? Because before, for example, Melanie mentioned COVID. Well, we don't have COVID data like we used to get it's only self-selected if parents want to tell us about it. And so now we get specific data about what's happening and why it's happening. And so we can really get to the root cause of the absent student and help us to really think about the new ways that we can work on instruction and be able to give students information and maybe give them work if they are home for the day and a half or 2 days for instruction. We can get that two-way communication that we really hope to achieve that we weren't being able to do before.
Awesome. Okay. We also had a lot of questions about higher ed, which I want to get to, but I want to finish up this topic on K-12. We had someone in the chat who asked about support services for students with dyslexia. So as mentioned in the chat, there are 2 bills that are being discussed right now in the Michigan House. They passed the Michigan House Education Committee this morning on Wednesday. We expect a vote in the future on the full House. It's already passed the Senate. So if you want more information on that, I'm happy to send that in the chat. But at the same time, there are students right now who have dyslexia who need supports. Melanie or Elena, can you provide some insights as to what supports exist for students who have dyslexia today?
You know, we have lots of staff who are educated about what to do when students come in. We have multi-tiered systems of support where we have building networks that are there, ready, who have information. One of the tricks with this bill and why you hear so many people talking about it is that it's controversial. On one hand, we know that there are students in our buildings who already are getting such wonderful services by our staff. And on the other hand, you hear that the bill has specific steps that might be different from what the staff are already doing. And so you already heard us talking about that we have gaps and we have the staff that are already feeling a little bit of pressure. And so if the bill tells them to do even more things and different steps, they might have to change their practices. And so it's not that staff don't want to comply. They just already have worked so diligently on doing practices that they've seen are successful. They work in partnership with the parents on multidisciplinary teams. And so if the bill gives them such prescriptive steps, they're a little bit concerned that from legislation, translating it to the classroom, to the team, they just want to make sure that the parents' voice and the students' voice and all those things all work together with the new bill.
Thank you, Elena. I think it's also important to note that there's this effort across the country with the science of reading, which has to do with best practices for how students learn how to read. It has to do with brain science. There's a whole podcast about this called Soul to Story, you all might be familiar with. And there's a question in the chat asking if your districts use science of reading curriculum. Melanie, do you want to start?
Yes, we do. And we have been actually started just prior to the pandemic. We launched Science of Reading curriculum for K-5. And so we've been doing that, and the pandemic kind of disrupted that launch. And so after things settled back down, we kind of went through re-implementation strategy. But we do use that, have been using that, and we are seeing growth in our scores because of it. And so we're really focusing on with our teachers, with coaching and modeling to make sure that we are implementing with fidelity the science of reading, and we will continue to do so.
And that's the same here. And we are very fortunate to, especially for us in Washtenaw County, we have we're right next door to Eastern Michigan University, 5 blocks away, where the Methodist courses are taught right in our building. So we really get a lot of assistance We also have instructional coaches who've been really working with alongside our teachers. We have a lot of new teachers in our district, and so we have them to be coached by our instructional coaches. And that continuous process of professional development has to occur because we have a lot of transition. Our scores oftentimes doesn't reflect the work that happens because we have a lot of mobility, a lot of homelessness. And so we have to continue to develop our teachers and continue to work with our students.
Right. And three pieces of information that might be helpful for our readers. In the most recent budget proposal there, or budget that got approved, there's something in there about the Michigan Department of Education working on a task force related to early literacy. I think it's also important to note that the state has supported school districts who want to send teachers to science of reading training. It's called Letters. And if you have questions about that, let us know. We can put more information in the chat. And then I think it's also important to acknowledge that there's quite a variety of different reading curriculums that are being taught across the state. The Education Policy Innovation Collaborative, which is this research arm out of MSU, they did an analysis of curriculums all across the state back in 2022, and they found quite a variety. They found several curriculums that were being used that weren't highly rated. They found that it's not always the same situation in one school versus another school, even if it's in the same district. And we also found that those researchers also found that some teachers are using poorly rated or unrated curricula in the first place. That's not a knock on teachers or districts. That's just what the analysis shows. So if you all have more questions about reading curriculum, let us know. We've got just a few more minutes left in here, but I want to make sure we get to as many reader questions as possible. We also had some questions on college and higher education. So the state has been working pretty hard these last few years to expand college aid. There's the 60 by 30 goal, which is 60% of working age adults by 2030 having a college degree. Then you also have the pandemic, which threw off college enrollment. So there's a lot of different pieces moving around in this space. Jack, I want to start with you. When you're talking to people who either haven't gone to college or went to college and dropped out, or maybe have to go back to college now, what are you hearing from them about the price of a college degree?
Yeah. Well, I think it's first important to celebrate what Michigan is doing on the sort of fostering higher ed front, particularly fostering Michiganders to get increasingly more degrees. It is true that the economics of our country are shifting and that access to the middle class will almost wholly rely upon some kind of degree. Heading into the future, and it's largely true now. I think what we hear most is that as I said at the beginning with Talent Together, there are so many folks across the state who have the desire, the work ethic, everything you could possibly want in order to get a degree, except they don't have the funds and they may not have the ability to drive to a college campus to get that degree, but everything else they have, right? And I think what we've learned is that there are thousands of Michiganders out there. I mean, I'm just talking about the folks who want to be teachers, let alone lots of other professions out there, right? Who, if given the opportunity to have their college costs subsidized, if given the opportunity to have a more flexible coursework schedule, will not only sign up for those opportunities, but will complete. And in some cases, will complete faster than maybe some of us who went to a more traditional four-year college away from home somewhere completed. I think we're finding there are a lot of highly motivated people out there. If you can just remove some barriers for them, they will do fantastic things with those opportunities.
Sure. And that's something that Bridge, by the way, is focusing more and more on. So we do stories at the beginning of the year about enrollment and where enrollment stands at our public universities and community colleges. But we're also trying to make sure that we're doing the follow through as well, because it's one thing to enroll in college, it's another thing to complete it. And it's possible that you do 2 years of college and you have the loans, but then you don't have the degree to then, make those loan payments back. So if you all have questions about that, we have a story on our website that talks about a program that helps pay student loans payments for teachers and social workers in K-12 settings. We have a story on our website that shows how much people make if they have a college degree versus no college degree in the state of Michigan. And then we also have analysis related to the value of college and the value of how much it's going to cost to attend college in Michigan, depending on what state scholarships or federal aid you get. So I just want to plug all of those different things we have in there. We also had several versions of the same question, which was basically the idea that there's a lot of focus on early literacy right now. And some people asked if are music and arts perpetually on the chopping block. Another person asked if you all think there's going to be a shift from early literacy to more of a STEM focus. And then there was another person who basically pointed out the merits of long-term music and arts education and how that helps folks later on. So I just want to open that up to anyone here. What do you all think? Do you think there's going to be a shift in priorities on that front? Do you think the arts are constantly on the chopping block? What are your thoughts?
Can I just jump in and say, it's really important that as educators and as a broader general public, for those of you who are joining us who are not necessarily educators but live in Michigan, that we not allow ourselves, and I fall into this trap sometimes too, of either oring these questions, right? We can either have arts or we can have early literacy or, whatever. And I get that a lot of these conversations emerge as a result of limited resources, sure. But I think most educators, like Dr. Zachary Ross, like lots of others, like Melanie, will find ways to provide the kind of well-rounded education that all kids deserve and need, and deeply understand that arts education can motivate children to, who struggle with reading, to stay engaged in that book, right? That it's a complementary experience within education. And I think often when we pull the debate away from children and more into this policy space, into kind of a policy vacuum, we end up having these somewhat ridiculous conversations about either oring. Like I said, we can either have gym class or we can read. And kids should have both. Kids should have more. Kids should have all of the above. I sure hope that arts are not on the chopping block. And I think what we found actually, and I'll speak to, my home district here in Detroit, of Detroit Public Schools Community District. One of the first things that Superintendent Vitti did was install much broader access to arts, to the arts and to music in every elementary school in the city of Detroit, because I think he realizes not only is that a good in and of itself, but it helps to motivate kids to do all the other things, right, that are important for school. So I hope that they're not on the chopping block, and I think we see evidence of superintendents who are leading from a both and perspective, not an either or.
Thank you, Jack. Melanie, Elena, Karen, any thoughts on that one?
I would certainly agree with Jack. I think about as we're forward thinking, we wrote a magnet grant and received it, and our magnet, looking at our journey this year in STEAM and IB across the district. And we intentionally wrote it as STEAM, adding the A for arts. And so we think about when you ask the question about the arts, yes, across the board, when you look internationally and globally, Finland, to have the arts across for all of their students, and they really talk about music and art, and that's a whole cultural perspective. When you go to Ghana and look at what they do at their highest performing schools, and in China and all the Asian countries, it's all about the arts. When you think about technology, it's about digital literacy. So when you ask about, is it literacy or STEM, it's both digital literacy, media literacy. And so when you ask those questions, it really brought me back to thinking about how are we ensuring that our students are future ready. And Melanie answered that question earlier. We have to engage them in the arts. We have to ensure that they understand that literacy is across the spectrum. Arts is across the spectrum. And when we are thinking about the International Baccalaureate curriculum, when they asked about curriculum, IB brings the arts and literacy across the entire gamut, and STEAM does the same thing. And they don't block them separately. They actually pull them all together. And I think that's going to be the responsibility of all educators in the future, by ensuring that students see how to meld them all together. and ensuring that they're strong in arts, strong in literature, strong in math, strong in technology. And that's how we'll ensure that we have a future-ready, globally prepared citizen.
Thank you, Elena. We're in our last few moments, so I want to ask a question about mental health. And then, like I said, I want to end on a hopeful note and ask you all about an opportunity for this school year. So we had several reader questions about mental health. We had someone who asked, what's the plan to help kids with their mental health during these trying times? I'm curious, Melanie, Alina, Karen, Jack, any of you are welcome to answer that question. And I will note that the legislature is in session today. And so there might be some developments on that mental health front today. And if there are, Bridge will report on that.
I'll start. I think that mental health is key, and then really the pandemic brought it to light. It's always been present, I think, with social media and cell phones and our littlest of littles starting on tablets and devices and not having that human interaction and play like we used to. I think that mental health is starting younger, and it's really important that the schools partner with the parents. We have a partnership with Cure Solace to help them. A lot of times, again, it's alleviating those barriers, helping them connect them to people that they need that can further their help and support at home and beyond the school day, because there's only so much we can do during the school day with the limited resources that we have. And the 31AA funding was huge, and it was kind of devastating to us this year when that took a hit in the budget, and I hope that gets revisited. But that funding, providing that adequate support for our students with the social workers, the counselors, the psychologists, partnerships with Cure Solace, all those things, like schools are being asked to do more and more and more. And we want to support the whole child, because if they need that mental health support, the behavioral support, they won't learn unless we can provide that first. And so when we can give them that adequate mental health support, then we can further engage them in learning, and then they grow as a child altogether into young adults.
Thank you, Melanie. So in our last few minutes, I want to turn to a moment of hope. We've had a lot of different questions, from mental health to K-12 programming to chronic absenteeism to how do you even pay for college to how do we keep the people who went to college in schools. And there's a bunch more. And I just want everyone to know that if we didn't get to your question, we still really appreciate you sending them. We tried to combine some questions because we got so many. But we talked about the challenges. Now I want to talk about opportunities. Karen, I'll start with you and we can go around the circle. What is one opportunity that exists during the 24-25 school year for either students or staff in Michigan?
For students, I would say that the universal preschool, we were able to expand the number of families that we could provide services for, and the income eligibility changed, so it included a lot more people. All of our programs within Gretchen's House are full. We have several GSRP programs, and that to me is a success, an opportunity and a success. And also, you know, those families are receiving supports that they may not have in a traditional preschool classroom. So,
Jack?
I think there are two that we're going to learn a lot about this year. One is the introduction of apprenticeships into the preparation, into teacher preparation and teacher certification is something that is happening, is growing pretty rapidly across the country, where teachers are doing full year apprenticeships before or longer before they get their own classroom. I think that's going to mean the world for retaining more teachers long term and making newer teachers feel more successful in the classroom. So I'm looking forward to tracking our first apprentices this year getting their own classrooms this fall, or have their own classrooms now, and seeing how they do. And the second is strategic staffing. I think we have a partnership with Arizona State University where schools around the state are adopting essentially a team teaching approach across grade levels. I think we're going to learn so much about the human side of teaching and wanting to be connected to other teachers, wanting to work on a team rather than being isolated in a classroom. And I hope and expect we're going to see what other states are seeing is that when schools adopt this approach, they retain their teachers longer, their teachers are happier, and students do better. So looking forward to seeing that prove out over the course of this first school year.
Melanie? Oh, I think you're muted.
Sorry about that. One of the things I'm most excited about and looking forward to is really developing the use of AI in our classrooms with our teachers and teaching our students how to collaborate with it, but also showing our teachers how it can assist them and kind of become their teacher assistant to help differentiate instruction for students and provide more personalized learning. And very much looking forward to that and seeing how that also impacts our student engagement, achievement, and some of those 21st century skills and collaboration and creativity.
And Elena, bring us home. What's one opportunity for this school year for either students or staff?
Well, I mentioned our grant, and it kind of goes with both Jack and Melanie. Part of our grant is the IB portion, and then the other one is STEAM. So with the IB, we are looking at extending it to doing some apprenticeships where our students are going to become those teachers, the teacher pipeline. And so we just got a grant with MDE, so we'll be bringing in some new teachers. And how is that going to look with that seat time? I'm hoping MDE will work with us to have a seat time waiver so we can bring in a pipeline of teachers, as well as with STEAM. How will we use AI to help us to do that?
Thank you. Okay, so you've got universal pre-K, how we support and train teachers, how we integrate artificial intelligence into teaching, and how we get IB programs in schools with STEAM, so science, technology, engineering, arts, and math. Thank you all so much for being here. I'm going to let Jackie close out this program, and we'll go from there.
Thank you, Isabel. Also, thank you, Jack, Dr. Zachary Ross, Karen, and Melanie. Thank you to all of our readers here as well. We will be posting a recording of today's program on Bridge Michigan's website, app, and social media channels this week. And you'll be able to find out more about our next, well, actually, I think our next lunch break, you'll hear more about that in the coming months. Thank you again, everyone, and have a great day.